Welcome to Educating the Human Potential, the podcast that is about optimizing education for a better society through a Montessori lens. My name is Biff Maier, and I'm here with Nicole Coman. In this episode, we're sitting down with Suneel Gupta, and he's exploring, among other things, his new book, Everyday Dharma.
I think our listeners are going to find this episode to be fascinating because Suneel has such a wealth of experience, everything from being a best-selling author, as you mentioned. He's a visiting professor at Harvard Medical School. He started a well-known and successful mobile healthcare company called Rise. And overall, he's just an incredible speaker.
So I think that the thing that our listeners are going to be most fascinated by or connect the most with is his insistence that we find a balance between striving, the motivation that we have to accomplish things. Because, we all feel like we have our calling. We know what we're trying to do, but also finding the balance between that and joy.
Yeah.
And I find when he talks about that, he's inspiring. He speaks from his own experience. He tells wonderful stories.
Mm-hmm. He's quite a storyteller.
So I'm sure this is going to be really enjoyable.
Welcome, Suneel. We're really happy to have you here with us today.
It's good to be here.
Yeah. And so, upon you coming to our podcast, we've been doing a bit of research on you just to learn about your fascinating journey from being a best-selling author, a renowned speaker, a Harvard Medical School visiting scholar, and a founding CEO of Rise, which we're going to talk about today a little bit because I'm very interested in Rise, which is a breakthrough wellness company. It's a mobile healthcare company, yeah?
Yes. That's right.
Yeah.
One-on-one health coaching over your mobile phone.
That's right. I know that. We're going to start off with your best-selling books because we're very interested in those.
I find it fascinating that when you found your Dharma as an author, you wrote first about how to get people to buy into you or to buy into someone making a pitch, right? And then you pivoted to writing the Dharma book about sort of how to get yourself to buy in to yourself.
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
So I'm curious about the transition.
Pablo Picasso has a great quote, and it is that the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away. And, my first book, Backable, was really about how do we give our gift away, especially if you're somebody who hasn't sort of proven themselves in an industry yet. You're a first-time entrepreneur, you're somebody new inside a company, you haven't necessarily cut your teeth, but you have an idea. How do you get other people to buy into that? And that was a focus of mine because I spent many years trying to do it unsuccessfully. And I think that the greatest piece of writing advice that I ever got was don't necessarily write about what you know, but write about what you want to know. And then go out and do all the work that it takes to go and learn that and then write about the journey. Mm-hmm. And those make for really interesting books. So that's what happened with my first book was Backable. How do we get other people to buy into our ideas? But to your point, Biff, there was still this missing piece, which is, what is my gift? How do I know what my gift is? Right? And so many people that I was talking to, especially young people, as I was out there speaking about Backable after it was published, would say to me, hey, listen, great tips, techniques, but I still don't know what my thing really is. How do I discover what my purpose is in life? What my meaning ought to be? And I realized that purpose and meaning can sound like these really grandiose sort of ideas, and it can sometimes seem like it's an Instagram reel where you sort of are quitting your job and you're moving to Paris and you're becoming a painter. Mm-hmm. But you have people with real day jobs. I'm from Detroit. Nicole and I were just bonding over Michigan. And I thought about all my friends back home that are, they're working to pay the bills right now. That's where they are right now. And how do they find purpose? How do they find meaning in their life? So the title of my second book was Everyday Dharma. And every day was a really important part of that because the whole principle of it is that you don't have to abandon your life in order to transform the way that you live. There are these little practices that we can bring into our life that can bring us more meaning and joy. And that's why I wrote the book.
Mm-hmm.
For our listeners that aren't familiar with the term Dharma, can you define that for them?
Yeah, so Dharma is really your inner calling, and it's the thing that lights you up. My grandfather introduced me to the concept of Dharma, and the way that he introduced me to it was we were sitting on his porch in New Delhi. I was visiting from the United States, and he and I would sit together on the porch. He was a man of few words, but he taught me so much, and he just had this incredible energy about him. I remember one day we were sitting on his porch and he pointed at the Indian flag and it was bellowing in the distance, it was waving in the distance, and he showed me what each of the colors meant on the flag. But in the center of the Indian flag is a wheel. It's a navy blue wheel. So if you ever go and look at the Indian flag, you'll see this almost kind of these hubs and spokes. And he said that is the wheel of Dharma. And I said, well, what does Dharma mean? And he said, well, Dharma is who you are. And it's how who you are is expressed through what you do. And when those two things are aligned, who you are and what you do, when they feel aligned, you come alive in a brand new way, right? And the thing that he taught me is that as we get older in life, this wheel starts to spin faster and faster and faster, right? We have more obligations, more duties, more bills to pay, all these things that sort of pull us to the outside of the wheel. And, that's inevitable and it happens. And I think we all have found ourselves in positions where we felt like, oh my gosh, I'm showing up every day. I'm working really hard, but I'm not necessarily expressing who I really am. And the key to Dharma isn't necessarily to avoid that from happening because again, it's an inevitable part of life, but to find yourself, catch yourself when it has happened so that we can make these little adjustments to find ourselves back to the center of the wheel.
So it's not necessarily a shift in your lifestyle. It can be everyday Dharma in which your routine may remain the same, except that you're doing, I think you describe a 55-5 strategy. You might want to explain that.
Yeah. At little adjustments can go a long way. And that's really kind of been my life's work. I travel around the world. I study exceptional leaders. I try to unpack the habits that really took them to where they are right now. The quote that I've had in mind this entire journey was from Frederick Matthias Alexander, who said that we do not decide our futures. What we decide are our habits, and those habits decide our futures. And so what I wanted to figure out was, what are the habits?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. What are the little things? And it's interesting for me because when we look at exceptional leaders, people who have done extraordinary things, oftentimes we pay attention to their external habits. Pay attention to the way they communicate, the way they are in front of a group, the way they lead in front of others. But we sometimes miss the internal habits, the things that they're doing behind the scenes that lead them to be able to do everything else externally. So I almost think of like the metaphor of a lamp. If you're looking at a lamp and you're studying a lamp, it may be very tempting to look at the lamp shade. What's the color of the shade? What's the shape of the shade? But sometimes we miss the light that's actually shining into the shade, right? And so I want to study the light. I want to know what those internal habits really are. And one of the things I realized getting to the 55-5 is that energy, how we manage our energy, is such an important part of leadership. We know how to manage our time. I think if you're listening to this podcast right now, my guess is you've learned about time management. You go to Amazon, you'll be met with thousands of results if you type in time management. But how to manage our energy, that is not a craft. That is not a skill set that we tend to learn. And yet, when we look at exceptional teams and leaders who are able to create and build momentum in their lives and in their careers, and we compare them to people who have incredible potential, but they tend to fizzle out or flatten. Very rarely do the people who fizzle out run out of time. Very rarely do they run out of talent. What they almost always run out of is energy. They simply just don't have enough fuel to keep doing what they do. When I talk to leaders, I coach a lot of leaders now as well. And one of the most common things I hear is, look, as I get older in my life, I feel like I have more experience, I have more wisdom, I have more relationships. I have all these things that I sought to accumulate, but the one thing that I have less of now is energy. I don't have this fuel to put all these other things into practice. So again, great leaders, I think, really understand that they have to be as intentional about managing their energy as they are with their time. And one of the very simple techniques that I offer to my audiences is the 55-5 rule, which is that whenever possible, for every 55 minutes of work, you're taking 5 minutes of focused, deliberate rest. 55-5. Now, it's not always possible. You're not going to be in the middle of a key meeting and 55 minutes is up and you say, well, okay, well, I'm done. I'm out. But even when I audit the schedules of, great leaders who are leading lots of people, they have lots of responsibilities, we'll find these 60-minute blocks in their schedule where it didn't need 60 minutes. It didn't need a full hour. It didn't need to be a 60-minute meeting. It could be a 55-minute meeting. It didn't need to be a 60-minute block of work. It could be a 55-minute block of work. So what they start to do is they start to almost create this rhythm of recovery inside their schedule. So it's almost like your cup is sort of depleting, but then you're intentionally bringing it back up. There is a term, Nicole, you're probably familiar with, called the paradox of recovery, right? And the paradox of recovery, the simple way that I can understand this is that the more stressed out you are, the harder it actually is to find relief, right?
And to focus.
And so what ends up happening, I think our model is broken because what we tend to do is we tend to sort of go to empty and then we rely on a long vacation or, a long weekend to try to get us back up to the green, right? But it's much harder to go from red to yellow even than it is to go from yellow to green. So what great performers tend to understand is don't let yourself get to the red. It's almost like a campfire. Like if you're building a campfire, right? To throw little sticks in there to keep the fire going, relatively easy. But if the fire goes out, oh my gosh, now you got to go find the big logs. You got to get the tinder. You got to get the kindling. You got all this stuff to kind of rebuild the fire. But in some ways, that's the model that we use for recovery. We exhaust ourselves and then we rely on a vacation to magically fix it. And it never works. Most people report feeling more stressed out 1 week after vacation than they did 1 week before. So what tends to work much better are these little breaks in between throughout the day, every single day.
I thought it was really interesting also. You describe a variety of ways to use those 5 minutes, that it's not always just, straight out rest. Can you run down a little list of those?
Yeah. So, taking a dance break, like literally putting on your favorite track and, shutting the door if that's what's comfortable and just dancing, right? There's a couple that saw me speak months ago and they wrote me the other day and they said that one thing they've started doing is a 1-minute hug. Okay, so and when they both get off of work, one works from home, one works in the office, but as soon as they get home and they reconnect, they give each other a 1-minute hug.
That's a long time.
That's a long time. Trust me. I pitched it to my wife and she's like, how about 15 seconds?
Yeah, I already got uncomfortable thinking about this.
I know. But the oxytocin that releases in the moment of connection, in the moment of reset. And one of the things I often hear from people who are, struggling a little bit with relationships is like, the transition from work to home can be very, very hard, right? And so this is a way to just kind of transition back. That's another example. Some people like to meditate. Some people like to breathe. Some people like to stretch, push-ups, sit-ups, just getting out into nature. The key really is that you are an N of one, and what works for you may not work for other people. So start to experiment with these different recoveries. And by the way, it's a great way to make small talk with somebody. Like I've always struggled with small talk in my life. Like I want to sort of like get to depth with people. And I find this to be like one of those interesting conversations that I can ask somebody now at a party is, hey, so what do you do when you're looking to like reset really quickly? What do you do? And you get the craziest answers sometimes. The other day, this executive told me he likes to talk to himself. And I was like, wow, that's a really honest answer. And how do you, are you working from home? He's like, no, we're back in the office. But what I do is I pop my headphones, my AirPods in, and people think I'm having a conversation with somebody, but I'm actually just talking to myself, right?
That's great.
That is great.
So you get the wildest answers. So start to build your menu of what are the little recoveries that work for you. And then every time you have one of those 5-minute breaks, pick something off the menu.
I find this to be fascinating, and I wanted to pick your brain about how we might be able to translate this to children, right? We spend so much time in school and early on teaching them how to manage time, right? But how can we teach them early on how to manage that energy, right?
This is so top of mind for me, Nicole, because my daughter, like literally yesterday, they're going on a trip, her school, and she was getting packed. And she also had a test the next day, and she had a choir rehearsal that was happening that night, and she just felt very, very overwhelmed. And when you feel overwhelmed, it feels like it's a race against time. Right. So what she was trying to do is, I only have a certain number of minutes and hours remaining between now and the time I have to go to bed, but I have a lot of things I need to get done. So let me pack as much as I possibly can into each possible minute. Right. That's, again, that like reasonable sort of logic, because that's the way we've been taught. Mm-hmm. But when she came to me, she was so overwhelmed that she just literally did not know what to do. Like, she was scrambling. She was trying to study, but nothing was sticking. She was trying to pack, but her packing was really messy. And so what we did is we just took 2 minutes together and we just breathed. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I asked her to put her hand on her chest. I asked her to say some gentle words to herself. Mm-hmm. I asked her to close her eyes. And we just sat there together in her room. I turned down the lights and she breathed and I breathed, right? And at the end of the 2 minutes, we opened our eyes, and it's not like the problems went away. It's not like the burdens or the responsibilities went away, but her capacity to deal with all of that went up. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really the key, which is that, oftentimes when we talk about well-being, one of the solutions that we get offered is, start to decrease the demands in your life, right? Start to kind of take a more of an eat, pray, love approach, right? And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but I think it misses the alternative. And the alternative is actually, you don't have to reduce the demands in your life. You don't have to wish that things would go away. You can actually increase your capacity to meet those demands. And capacity does not just come from the number of minutes that you give to something, the number of hours you give to something. It comes from the quality of the energy that you bring to each and every single one of those hours.
Right. It's about quality over quantity, right? And
very much so.
And I love that. I love that, just recentering yourself and being able, again, with focus, and then sitting there afterwards. And I bet your daughter was able to kind of prioritize what needed to come next because she wasn't so overwhelmed, right?
In a much better way, right? And so the thing that I'm trying to impress upon her, and by the way, I'm trying to impress things upon her that I did not learn until I was like my late 30s,
of
right?
Course,
and
yeah.
She's 12.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, okay, you got some time here, and you're already way ahead of the curve, because when I was 12, I was a complete mess when it came to this stuff. But the thing is, imagine if that happened to her in 2 minutes. Imagine what would happen if she was taking these 2-minute breaks throughout the day, every single day. And the same thing is true for you, me, everybody who's listening right now. Imagine if you were giving yourself these little spaces in your day, every single day. How would that change things? And what ends up happening when I experiment, first of all, there's many studies around this, but I have had a chance now to run this with many, many leaders who are feeling completely overwhelmed. And what they often come back to me with is, I sometimes now feel as much energy at the end of the week as I did at the beginning of the week, just because throughout the week I've been taking these little quick short breaks.
One of the things I think is interesting about this is there are lots of teachers now who are trying to practice mindfulness in their classrooms. Mm. And it seems to me like generally the way they do that is they have a time when the whole class is together and they have some sort of guided something that they all do together. Yeah. And I don't think that's the answer. I mean, it's probably a step in the right direction, but it sounds to me like you're really talking about self-regulation. You're talking about kids reading their own status and adjusting that status purposefully. And that takes a different kind of education. I mean, we really have to, that happens one person at a time. Sure. with somebody who can guide them to know themselves.
Oftentimes that has to be explicitly taught, right? Yeah. Adults, children, right? So,
and I don't think it necessarily translates when you do something, when you say, here's a good way for our group to calm down, because it seems to me like that's one of the things that makes Montessori education, I think, an optimal setting for this kind of approach to growing up, is that so much of the work is individualized, that we do actually have conversations with kids one-on-one to try to help them do that kind of regulation. I don't think we do it across the board. And that's, I think, one of the messages that I'm taking from this is that it's good for everybody, not just the kids that are off the wall. It's good for the kids that are performing at a high level and are accumulating that level of stress and anxiety, for them to see that they can give themselves moments.
I think that's so well said, in so many ways. The technique itself is something that I think we can learn as a group. But the deployment of the technique, I think that oftentimes it's very individualized, right? And the word that comes to mind is awareness, right? How do we start to teach a level of awareness of where am I right now? I'm constantly throughout my days using a traffic light in my head, red, yellow, green, right? So green, I'm feeling more than okay. Red, I'm definitely not okay. Yellow, somewhere in between. And I'm constantly asking myself, where am I right now? And the key to all of it is you don't want to get to the red. You don't want to get to that spot.
Because the recovery is just too hard.
The recovery is so hard. It takes a long time. So catching yourself in the yellow. And it's really interesting when we look at the habits of high performers. It's almost like the fluctuation that they have is far less than the fluctuation that most of us tend to have. So they're not going from green to red. They're going from green to yellow, back to green. So it's not like they're constantly feeling great. They're just catching themselves at the right moment. You can only do that if, to your point, Biff, you have this level of awareness of where am I right now?
Mm-hmm. And a sense of responsibility to adjust that.
Sense of responsibility to adjust it. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Can I ask a question just to shift the conversation just slightly?
Yeah.
So upon reading about your work, one thing that really stood out to Biff and I, we were talking about this, is the road to success is not always smooth, right? And so I think I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about, your experience when you did all those pitches early on before Rise became a success, and kind of that process for you.
Difficult roads lead to beautiful destinations, right? And that can be a hard thing to swallow, right? Especially if you are somebody who really wants to impress the world and get people to sort of like you and reward you when you're getting turned down, when you're getting rejected, when you're getting dismissed. That can be very hard. And for me, I'd spent I tried to create 2 startups that both failed. When I was raising money for my third, I was having a very difficult time getting investors to buy in. I'd been rejected by over a dozen investors. And, for me, I was, I really felt like I was a failure. And, one of the things that changed for me is that I remember after one of my rejections, I was in the parking lot and I was walking to my car, and the investor who had passed was also walking to his car. I think he was heading to a meeting. And he saw me and he said, "Hey, let me ask you a question. Why are you doing this startup? Like, why do you want to build this company?" And the company was called Rise. It was one-on-one health coaching right over your mobile phone. And this was 2012 when, services like this didn't really exist. And the story I told him was about my dad. I told him, hey, my dad, when I was very young, my dad dropped me off to school one day and he said, "Hey, I'm going to pick you up right there by this flagpole." And school bell rings and I go by the flagpole and he's not there. And the reason that he's not there is because he had gone to a routine medical appointment and he had collapsed, and they had rushed him to the OR for an open heart surgery. Just, caught it in the nick of time. It was the luckiest thing that ever happened to our family, is that he had that medical appointment on that day, because otherwise it may have been much more tragic. But what I remember the most is we were leaving the hospital days later, and I remember looking at him from the back seat of the car as we were driving home, and he looked like a completely different person, frail, weak, didn't feel like a dad anymore. For me, I was like, come on, Dad, you got to be strong again. You got to be a dad again. And lucky for me, he did. He turned his life around. He started to eat better. He started to exercise, but he had help, and the help was the doctors, the nurses. And so I really wanted to make that level of care more affordable, more accessible to more people. So I'm telling this investor this story, and he says to me, hey, listen, why didn't you tell that story inside the pitch meeting? And I said, well, because you're an investor, right? You care about the business, you care about the numbers, you care about the data. He says, absolutely, you care about all of that. But here's the thing. When you tell that story, you came alive in a brand new way, right? Something changed in you. So he's like, so if I give you one piece of advice, tell that story first when you're giving a pitch, or at least remind yourself of that story. Right. And then share the numbers, then share the data. And that was the most important adjustment that I made for raising money for my company. We were able to raise millions of dollars. Ultimately, we were able to sell the company in a successful exit. We took the company public. All that happened. Every meeting that I was in, I either told that story about my dad or I reminded myself of that story. And the reason that it matters when it comes to difficult roads lead to beautiful destinations is we have to remind ourselves of why we're doing what we're doing. We have to. Simon Sinek, I was on his podcast, and he wrote a book called Start With Why. And one of the things we talked about was you have to also stick with why, right? It's easy. It can be easy sometimes to start with why, right? Companies have mission statements, and they start with why. But to remind yourself on a near daily basis, sometimes even an hourly basis when things get tough, why I'm doing what I'm doing is so important. And what I have found, one step more tactical, is to have some type of visual for that, right? Some kind of experience that you can visualize. For example, if you're somebody who, like me, is in your mid 40s and you're starting to think about like, gosh, my body is starting to like behave in weird ways, and I'm not nearly in as good a shape as I used to be. And if I have the wrong meal, it's going to stick with me for days. That's where I am right now, right? And I really want to be with my grandkids in a very active way, right? So I literally have a visual in my mind of me on the ground with my unborn grandkids playing around, like not just watching them from a distance, but playing around with them on the ground the way they used to when it was with my own kids. That visual is the visual I think about every time that it's morning and I'm going to go work out before I start work. And I'm like, I don't want to work out right now, but that visual is the thing that kind of keeps me going. So we all need a visual. If you're listening to this, the question for you is, what is that thing for you? And how do you bring it to your awareness over and over again every single day?
Sure.
Is that I just want to ask about the visual, because it strikes me that that must also be informed by the very special relationship you had with your grandfather.
Yeah. My grandfather.
He sounds like a really remarkable man.
And we didn't spend all that much time together, getting back to quantity versus quality, because he lived in India and I lived in the United States. I lived in Michigan. But the quality of that time was just so special. He was such a present person. I remember something being odd to me as an American kid, noticing him for the first time sitting on his porch, just drinking chai. Right. And doing nothing else. Right. And I remember thinking to myself, like, something's off here. I was 7 years old. I'm like, something doesn't seem right here. And I realized that it was just so different than the way we operated in the United States. It was in the mornings, the TV was on, the radio was on in the background. My dad had like a half-eaten bagel in his mouth. He was tying his tie. My mom was making breakfast. It was chaos. Right. And, to take a moment to just sit down and do nothing else but focus on one thing. In his case, just drinking that glass of chai, the mug of chai. I hadn't seen that before, but now I kind of realize, getting back to this idea that it really was the little things, right? It's the little practices. Things like that really made him incredibly present. And so when I was with him, it felt like I was the only focus. Like he was not scattered, in the least. I heard a great quote the other day. I do these, what I call these Dharma dinners. And I host people at a restaurant. In this case, I host people at my home, and we talk about purpose and meaning and like how we're finding it in these busy back-to-back, news cycle lives, right? And this executive, this person who, she's grown to become a senior leader inside a music company. And her father was also a media executive. And she was talking about how she spent her last days with her father at the hospital. He passed. And she said that she started to talk to him about his life and the things that he learned. And he said to her, hey, I spent a lot of my life believing that if you did the big things, then all the little things would fall into place. But I realized at a certain point in time that I had it backwards. And if you focus on the little things and you get those little things right, the big things will take care of themselves. That's what I learned from my grandfather.
Yeah. Establishing that foundation, right?
Yeah.
And I just made a note to myself. I think, you were saying that your grandfather just sat there and just focused on one thing, whether it was the chai, whether it was you, but nothing else. And it established that level of connectedness, right? And I think back to what you were just saying about sharing that personal story with investors and whatnot. And that's what got them to buy in, because they established that connectedness with you. They felt your passion. They felt your purpose and why you were doing what you were doing. And I think that's such a great lesson for people to think about. Is you're not just up there doing a dog and pony show, right? And just selling yourself. It's about showing how meaningful this is to you, and establishing that connection. So I think that's really special.
I have heard, I've heard you say that we ask the wrong question of children, that we tend to say, what are you going to be when you grow up? And the only answer they have is an occupation, I was going to be a fireman.
I was going to be a marine biologist.
Okay. Right. And you said that's the wrong question. And I'm wondering, I don't think you've ever told us what the right question is. And I'm wondering how you would phrase it, how do you want to feel?
Yeah. I think I'm searching for the right question. I think the problem is that we are in an occupation mindset, right? So we expect that the answer to what do you want to be when you grow up be an occupation. Kids have been accustomed to that. We as adults are accustomed to hearing that. But when you get stuck in an occupation mindset, you miss, I think, the essence of why. Why do you, what is it about that thing that really interests you and excites you? The reason that this came up in my book is because, I've been meeting all these people who sort of felt like they were stuck in an occupation that they didn't like. And, one of them was a woman named Mila, and she was working inside a big company, technology company. She's a mother. And she sort of was looking back on her life and sort of just realized that she had taken the wrong turn. Like for her, she felt like she wanted to be a teacher. And she remembered the days back when she was young where she wanted to be a teacher and decided not to. And, many reasons for that. But ultimately she ended up in, something very different. She was in technology. She was working in project management, and she was really resenting that decision in her life. And she was telling me about this moment of sort of, clarity for her. And it happened through a very simple meeting with a mentor of hers, where she was divulging to her mentor that I feel like I messed my career up. I feel like I'm not living my purpose. I feel like I could have lived my purpose. I could have become a teacher, but I didn't. And this mentor just asked her a very simple question, which is, hey, what is it specifically about being a teacher that you love? Specifically, right? And so Mila starts rattling off the reasons. I love children. I love the idea of educating people. But then as she searches further down, she's like, I just love helping people grow. Like, I love the act of helping people grow. And our mentor is like, look, how do you do that now, today, in the role that you're in? How do you help people grow, right? And that was a complete sort of turning point for her, because she went back to her job, her day job. She never quit. She never left the company. She had her same parking space, but she started to find all these different ways that she could help people grow. Even if it was simple as like making sure that each week she was scheduling coffees with more junior level employees, signing up for programs that would allow her to get in front of a group and teach them things. She started to bring more and more of that into your life. And I think that's the point of everyday Dharma, like everyday Dharma, right? So getting back to the question for kids, we are asking them to say they want to be a teacher. We are asking them to say they want to be a project manager inside a big company, right? But what we're not asking is like we're not getting to the level of I love helping people grow, right? So what is the question?
And maybe the question is, who are you?
Yeah, or like what brings you joy?
Yeah.
Right now, instead of looking 10 years down the road.
Absolutely. And I think parents and teachers, we are really good, I think, potential sort of observers of this because we can sort of, I think, let kids know, hey, you lit up there, and sort of, I think in our own way, without being too imposing about it, just I think help kids bring awareness. Because one of the things that ends up happening, I think we all can relate to this, is we get older and we forget what we really enjoyed as kids. And for those of us who are lucky enough to still have our parents around, like, that's a great question to ask, which is like, what was I like as a kid? What did you see lit me up? Because that's great signal. That's great signal to what it is that we ultimately want to express in our lives. But we lose touch with that signal, and it can be very, very hard to get it back. The book is in some ways a playbook for that. But man, like, what if we just went and had a conversation with our parents, and said, hey, what was that thing? You don't have to read the book, right? You can get the answer right away. And then you can start to say, well, how do I bring more of that type of thing into my life?
So what are you working on now?
So I'm very interested in this idea of energy management. And so again, like, there's massive bodies of work out there on how to manage your time. There's tools, there's techniques, there's books, but how to manage your energy, not so much. There is some work, but it's just this really sort of, I think, very early field. And at the same time, it's ancient. So even tracing back to Greek mythology, there were two gods that were worshipped on a daily basis, like on an everyday basis, and that was Kairos and Kronos. Now, Kronos was the god of time, and Kairos was the god of energy. So Kairos was really the sequences of your life, right? And Kairos was really about sort of the depth of each moment throughout the day. And as civilization started to get built and we started to get more organized and we started to build companies and villages and organizations, we started to worship much more Kronos, the god of time. And we started to kind of miss Kairos, right? We started to kind of almost in some ways ignore Kairos. And so fast forward, many, many centuries, and here we are in what a lot of experts refer to as the human energy crisis, where 70% of our workforce feels like they are completely exhausted, where it is 40% of C-suite leaders right now are considering leaving their jobs over the next 12 months because they feel like they don't have enough energy to keep doing what they're doing. We are in a really sort of, I think, precarious position because we're out of energy right now. And arguably at a time when we need it now more than ever before.
More than ever, yeah.
Right? And so the question that I've been trying to answer is, not how do we completely turn our back on Kronos. We need schedules. We need discipline. We need to know if we're meeting up for a meeting that we're going to show up at a certain time, right? So there's value to Kronos, but how do we bring more Kairos into a Kronos life? How do we start to bring back that discipline? And that's a book that I'm working on now.
Yeah, interesting. Or even the balance between the two, right? And not leaning one way, which is usually towards time, because we're all running around like chickens with our heads cut off, right? Because we're trying to do so many things at once. But
that's right.
I'm very excited about this.
Well, Stevie Nicks wrote Dreams.
My favorite song.
One of my favorite songs too. And she wrote it in 10 minutes. Right? Clockwork Orange, great screenplay, considered one of the best, was written in less than a week. Dickens wrote The Christmas Story in just a couple of weeks, right? These were not acts of Kronos. These were acts of Kairos. There is this infinite potential, I think, that we have when we can really, really sink into a moment, when we really bring energy to a moment. And how do we start to have more of those moments?
Sure. What a good lesson.
Yeah, what a wonderful way.
Yeah. I really enjoyed this conversation.
I did as well.
Me too. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll look forward to that book.
Yep.
And focus our energy.
Yes, we will. What a great time that was, huh?
I wish we had more time with him.
Really. I mean, we kept him here.
We tried to push the envelope here with time.
Yeah. No, he really is an enjoyable person to talk to. He's really inspiring and just very personable. I mean, you can see why he focuses on connection, because he connects so well.
I absolutely think, I think there's a lot of life lessons to be learned from this particular episode. I mean, he really dives deep into how day-to-day, time management versus focus versus
and energy management.
And then how we can translate that to our children in schools. So I really enjoyed this. We need to bring him back.
I'm looking forward to his Kairos book.
Yes, right. In his next book, that's for sure.
His journey started with his book, Backable, The Surprising Truth Behind What Makes People Take a Chance on You. Mm-hmm. And then his second one is called Everyday Dharma. And that one's very practical. He gives 8 essential practices for finding success and joy in what you do, because he really focuses on the connection between your calling and your expression of your calling.
Mm-hmm. And I felt like really the way that it is fascinating. And I felt like the way that he described it, while he didn't go over all 8 principles in our time together, you can see how his suggestions are useful, they're practical, and could be implemented in everyday use.
If you really enjoyed that conversation as much as we did, I encourage you to take a look at Everyday Dharma, the 8 essential practices for finding success and joy in everything you do, and also Backable, the surprising truth behind what makes people take a chance on you.
And with that, Biff, I look forward to our next conversation.
Yes, me too. If you're enjoying this conversation as much as we are, following the show on your streaming service really helps more people discover the podcast. This episode is sponsored by TriNet. TriNet offers comprehensive HR solutions specifically designed for the education sector. Their services include payroll processing, benefits administration, risk mitigation, and compliance support. It enables schools and educational institutions to focus on their core mission. With TriNet, managing HR becomes seamless. It allows educators to dedicate more time to teaching and supporting students. To find out more, go to trinet.com AMS 2025. This podcast is produced by AMS, the American Montessori Society. However, the views that are expressed belong to us and to those of our guests. They do not represent those of the American Montessori Society.